What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G. Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock and on Vice. As today we're talking Season 5, Episode 1, the season premiere of Dark Side of the Ring. It is back. This one being called The Ballad of Earthquake John Tenta. The funny thing about this episode, not really funny, but I enjoyed the episode. It was a good episode. There really wasn't anything dark about it. It wasn't one of those cases where alcohol or drugs factored into his death. He died from cancer, and it was something that could have been avoided, but it really had nothing to do with his wrestling career. And I guess you can call, there really wasn't anything dark about it, honestly. And I honestly forgot that it wasn't John Tenta, but rather his tag team partner, Tugboat, Fred Ottman, that was the Shockmaster. For some reason, I thought it was John Tenta. It wasn't. They talk about the Shockmaster thing in great detail. We'll get into that. But again, nothing really dark about John Tenta or this episode. It was enjoyable and still sad by the end. A very sad, heartfelt ending. And not like sad in a depressing way. It was depressing, but not like, man, like that's such a sad story. It is a sad story, but like a good, sad story. Because the guy seemed like a genuinely good guy. But I thought this was still a pretty good, solid season premiere for Dark Side of the Ring. For me, I mean, looking at the topics, I don't know a whole lot about every person they're covering this season. It feels like they're running out of good, compelling topics to cover. I'm honestly kind of surprised the show keeps on getting renewed. I'm glad it is, but like we're 5 seasons deep now. How much more ground can you cover? And there's plenty of topics, but like some topics aren't as juicy as others. This is one of them, but I'm glad they did cover John Tenta. Again, probably not exactly a Dark Side of the Ring episode, but still an enjoyable, knowledgeable, interesting episode nonetheless. So they open it up with, them discussing him debuting as a plant in the crowd. His whole family was very big on this episode. His widow, his 2 sons, and his daughter. And they talk about how John Tenta Earthquake debuted as Earthquake on WWE TV back in 1989, attacking the Warrior with Dino Bravo as a plant in the crowd. And his son talks about how Tenta was respected throughout his career. He really wanted to wrestle from a young age. Tenta, not the son, that is. And he was a very accomplished wrestler, apparently. And by the way, I really don't know much about John Tenta. I didn't follow his career. That was before my time. I didn't go back and do my research on John Tenta. So a lot of this stuff was news to me. If you know a lot about the guy, then this probably isn't news. But I still found it interesting, even though I really didn't know a lot about the guy personally. So I found all of it interesting. But even if you did, you'll probably still enjoy it. But they talk about how he was an accomplished wrestler earlier in his life, in high school, and like doing actual wrestling. And he also did sumo wrestling, which was really interesting. But he retired undefeated because his sights were set on doing pro wrestling. So he joined All Japan Pro Wrestling in 1986. And while in Japan was where he met his wife, who was a singer. And it was like love at first sight, and they started dating soon after. And she talked about how the stars kind of aligned for that moment to happen. And they were really compatible from the get-go, which was cool. And they talked about how he joined WWF soon after, immediately feuded with Hulk Hogan. And the only thing with that, though, was that when you feuded with the top guy from the get-go, you probably made a lot of money and became a star. But once you lost to Hogan back then, there really wasn't anywhere to go but down. That's kind of what happened with him. But he had his biggest match ever, I believe, in Japan. They said, biggest match of his career in Japan in 1991. It was on a WWF Super Show with another promotion, not All Japan, but like a Japanese promotion. The guy that he faced, Kito, it was Kitao, probably mispronouncing the name, and I apologize. But he was a pretty well-known name over. He was a pretty well-known name over in Japan at that point. And they had 2 matches, one on one night and one on the other night, the next night. And his opponent, Earthquake's opponent, was not happy with losing to Tenta. And WWF, this was back when they were doing super shows with other promotions and stuff like that, and they didn't want to split the wins, apparently, by having Earthquake win one night and the other guy win the next. They just had Earthquake win both nights. So the guy did the job the first night, wasn't happy with losing, so he turned it into a shoot the next day by bringing a chair into the ring, getting himself disqualified, actually beating up on Tenta, Tenta firing back with actual shots, and they showed footage of it. It was like a mess. And then the guy went on the mic after the match and called the whole thing fake. Disrespecting Earthquake, saying it was a fake fight, wrestling's fake. I had never seen anything like that before. It was quite interesting to see the footage from what happened here. And the guy was fired the next day. They got into a backstage brawl after the match. Just crazy shit. That had nothing to do with Earthquake being dark, but it was an interesting story. And he got praised for his handling of the situation, did Earthquake. They talked about how he squashed Jake Snake during their feud. He squashed Damian, and how, I mean, he's probably told the story before. The snake that he squashed, there wasn't an actual snake in the bag, obviously. It was women's pantyhose, Jake the Snake. We heard a lot from Jake, and it's cool to hear Jake on these things, because Jake does Dark Side of the Ring. He does the A&E biographies. He's in AEW, and he doesn't give a fuck. He'll fucking do anything, so it was cool to see him on this thing. And he knew Tenta fairly well, I guess, from their feud and working with him and whatnot, so I thought it was cool they got him for this episode. And he talked about how it was women's pantyhose, and inside the pantyhose was meat, was like crushed up hamburger meat. And that's what Tenta sat on to make it look like he killed a snake. And people got, really mad over it. They sent in letters over that. It was really interesting to see that whole backlash. And that was back when people really thought the whole thing was real and got really upset over it. And there were no dirt sheets, not to the degree that we have now online and stuff, to really know that's not real. But anyway, so he joined up with Fred Ottman, a.k.a. Tugboat, and created the Natural Disasters that he and Earthquake. And because they got really big in WWE around this point and had a great run, he didn't see his family often. So he went back to Japan in 1993 after leaving WWF. Fred stayed in WWE. And he went home after his brother-in-law died. So he kind of, I don't know if he was done in the business after that was Ottman. I mean, he did the Shockmaster thing, so his brother-in-law dying, I think, was before Shockmaster. So if my timeline's correct, because they covered that after this. In the Natural Disasters, Tenta and Ottman, I guess, had a falling out. So they never really teamed or maybe even talked after that. I'm not sure. But they recapped the entire Shockmaster thing. That was entirely Ottman. Earthquake had absolutely nothing to do with it. But, Ottman was on the episode, so why the fuck not cover it? And they did. And it was still funny now as it was at that point. I wasn't watching back then, but it's a pretty ridiculous moment. The best part about this whole thing, and hearing Ottman talk about it and recap what was supposed to happen, what did happen with the whole fucking Stormtrooper glittered out helmet, whatever. The best part of them recapping this whole thing and showing the footage was Haku watching it for the first time. He could not stop laughing. That was the best part of the whole episode. It was amazing. He had never seen it before. He thought it was hysterical. It was, it was really good stuff. So they talk about how Earthquake went to WCW after that, got a big contract, less dates, exactly what he wanted, big money, and he moved to Florida. He was home a lot more. He was enjoying it. The problem was he wasn't really utilized well there, so he became Avalanche in WCW because they couldn't use Earthquake for legal reasons. He went by Avalanche. That sucked. He then went by Shark. That was the next gimmick they gave him. That was even worse, and he hated it. So he finally got repackaged as John Tenta. Now, what he did during that run, I don't know. They didn't really talk about it. They just showed him referring to himself on WCW television as John Tenta, his real name, and going without the gimmicks. And I guess that was what earned him another run in WWE years later, but he ended up just getting thrown in the oddities. As opposed to being used in a meaningful manner on his own, he got thrown in the oddities as Golga, a mask guy. People would never even know that it was John Tenta, and it didn't work out. So we got let go again, left WWF, opened a wrestling school. That didn't work out, filed for bankruptcy, got a job in retail at the mall. And Jake talks about it's a real, humbling experience to go from being a superstar in television to then having to work retail at a mall. And they talk about how he became a truck driver. It was around that time that he noticed that he was having blood clots in his urine. He had a tumor, he found out, in his bladder. And he kept it from his family for a while because he either neglected it or didn't want to scare him, whatever. But by the time they finally diagnosed it, it had advanced too far. And they found out it was bladder cancer. And I guess the son walked in on him one day. They were telling the story of him, walking in on Tenta, laughing at his old segments and stuff. And it was a nice, heartfelt moment. So the cancer went away, came back in 2005. And they mentioned, too, that it was like one of the most curable cancers. Because I guess the sister, or the daughter, the son's sister, obviously, worked in healthcare. And she knew, or one of them had worked in healthcare, and they found out, it's one of the most curable cancers, he'll be fine, whatever. But again, it got to a point where it was too serious, and there was nothing they could do. So one of the sons got married that June, and I thought they wouldn't be able to I thought he wouldn't make the wedding, which would have been even worse. But he was at the wedding. He didn't tell his kids that it got worse, and that it was coming back, and it was pretty much like, this is the end. Didn't want to tell the son that, as it was around his wedding time. So the cancer ended up spreading throughout his body, and it was a really just sad fucking story when the kid spoke about how he was literally on his deathbed, taking turns talking to each of his children and locking eyes with them before he finally passed away. And he passed away in his daughter's, like holding his daughter's hand, which is just wild, on June 7th, 2006. A few months before that actually was his first, or a few months later actually, so he made the wedding. He was able to be at the wedding, but it was a few months before his first grandchild was born, probably from the guy that got married. So he couldn't even meet his first grandchild, which is really sad. And they talked about the funeral. There was no wrestling representation at the funeral. The weird thing I thought about that, first of all, that's really sad. Second of all, what I thought was weird about that was that Ottman was obviously really, like, remorseful. Not remorseful, but, like, mourning the loss of his former friend, tag team partner, whatever, and was like, oh, I miss you, I love you, whatever. The thing with him is, though, did he go to the funeral? They made it sound like no one from wrestling was at the funeral. No one from WWE, no representation, which is pretty fucked up. But, like, not even his own partner? Because his partner here was talking about, oh, I love you, I miss you, whatever. Again, like I said, was he not at the funeral? And if not, why not? Like, I thought that was a bit of a disconnect. That was one question I had coming out of this thing, if he was at the funeral or not. They made it sound like no one from wrestling was. And if Ottman wasn't, that's pretty fucked up. And then to end the episode, they talk about, their favorite memories of him, and they share family photos of him and stuff like that. So it was cool. It was a good episode, definitely sad by the end. But not dark, though. Not dark in a depressing way. Depressing because it's sad, but I mean, all these episodes are sad to a certain degree, so it's really not that shocking. But he seemed like a good dude that was never really given a chance to get beyond a certain level and be more than what he was in WWE and WCW, that is. It's still good stuff here to kick off the season. Again, not exactly putting the dark and dark side of the ring, but it was still an enjoyable episode nonetheless. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. I'm hoping to have the Dark Side of the Ring reviews up on probably Sundays each week, if not on Fridays. Either Fridays or Sundays. So I'm hoping to get back to the reviews weekly here on the channel, either on Fridays or on Sundays, depending on when I watch it any given week. So stay tuned for those. If you want more Dark Side of the Ring reviews from me, they're in the description box down below on a playlist. All of my Dark Side of the Ring reviews, that is, from the first 4 seasons down below on that playlist. So check it out. Have a great one, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.